Thank you, Rennie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Medical Devices webinar. Today, I will be discussing the medical devices landscape with respect to the recent regulatory updates in the space, along with the different types of innovative technology that is helping transform this industry. So let's start off with a brief overview of what a medical device is. We'll begin with definitions just to make sure we're all on the same footing, and starting off with what the U.S. health regulator, the FDA, considers a medical device. This is the definition that we'll be working with throughout this webinar. Simply put, a medical device is an instrument or a part of an instrument that is intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent disease. It doesn't count pharma products like Advil, which act through chemical means. Now we'll dive into the more specific examples of medical devices. As you can see here, there are three main categories based on the risk to the patient and the amount of regulations that are involved. Class 1 devices are low risk. Examples here are dental floss, Band-Aids. You can buy them at your local pharmacy store, and they do not have any major regulations to meet. As you move up the ladder, you do have devices like cardiac pacemakers and implants that would be more subject to scrutiny in terms of the regulations that are involved. And this last bucket requires a rigorous approval process that involves extensive clinical trials, just as a pharmaceutical drug might. Almost all of us track our health on mobile applications, so this raises the question of, are these considered medical devices? Apps and wearables fall into this regulatory gray area, as some do count as medical devices and some do not. So here are some examples of when a mobile app would be considered a medical device. Apps that are considered medical devices use a sensor that's connected to a mobile platform. An example here is the smart thermometer device that's connected to a mobile application that Kinsa Health makes. Another example here is a glucose monitor that's connected to a mobile application that monitors one's glucose levels. And here are some examples of what are not considered to be medical devices. As we've said before, pharmaceuticals, because they act through chemical means, do not count as medical devices. Other examples of what are not considered medical devices include electronic medical records, educational tools such as surgical education videos, medical dictionaries, and billing and patient satisfaction software. There are new and innovative medical devices, or those in the making, that are currently disrupting the conventional way we think about medical devices. Some of the examples range from disease-specific wearables that can communicate to providers with real-time patient data, to robotic pills that are engineered to release a therapeutic at a certain location in the body. Now, it is important to note that these are not all FDA approved, nor are they all finished in developing their products. This slide is meant to indicate the general direction of which the medical device industry is heading in. So one way to gauge innovation is through the activity of startups. So we're going to look at how much money is coming into the space in the form of investments to private companies. In looking at the equity funding of medical devices from the last 5 years, 2017 actually saw a record high in the amount of funding that was raised despite the overall deal activity declining. One of the reasons for the high funding seen in 2017 was due to the $800 million in equity funding raised by Verily, which is the life sciences arm of Google. Other companies that raised more than $100 million included Ottobock Healthcare, a German-based company focused on prosthetics and technical orthopedics, along with the robotics startup Auris Surgical Robots. This could also indicate that investors are willing to place more calculated bets across the industry. Here we track the Smart Money VC's investment activities in medical device startups. We define this term Smart Money VCs as the top VC firms according to their respective portfolio valuations and investment outcomes. In this case, we looked at the activities of such firms that specifically focus on healthcare. New Enterprise Associates led with the most investments in the space, along with Versant Ventures and OrbiMed Advisors. All of them invest in different types of medical device companies, but we'll be discussing where each is invested more in. First, let's start off with NEA. They have made more than 55 investments in medical devices, with a strong focus on cardiovascular companies in the last 5 years. An example of this is CVRx, which makes a minimally invasive cardiovascular device for high blood pressure and heart failure. Versant Ventures' focus has been on ophthalmology. Two of their investments include AcuFocus and RxSight, both of which create medical devices for vision. And lastly, OrbiMed Advisors' focus lean towards orthopedics and surgery medical devices. Examples here include SI-BONE and Cerapedics. SI-BONE develops tools and products for diagnosing and treating patients with low back issues related to sacroiliac joint disorders. As you can see, startups are working on a range of different solutions spanning various categories. We use the CB Insights Market Map Maker to highlight some of the interesting technology currently driving the medical device industry. This market map is not meant to be exhaustive and is meant to highlight some of the more newer and emerging startups, as well as those that have raised a considerable amount of funding thus far. So looking at the market map here, I want to mention just a couple of the categories here. Diabetes management is a category that has recently received a lot of attention, and a company worth mentioning here is Fractal Laboratories, which is developing a same-day minimally invasive procedure known as Revita to treat type 2 diabetes. This company last raised funding in July with its $44 million Series D round from big-name investors such as Bessemer Venture Partners, Domain Associates, General Catalyst, and Google Ventures. Another company I wanted to quickly highlight is Bigfoot Biomedical, who raised recently this past December with its $37 million Series B round. They make artificial intelligence-enabled insulin delivery devices such as an insulin infusion device and a smart injection pen. Its primary goal is to create an artificial pancreas through its set of integrated devices that continuously monitor one's blood sugar levels. The next category here is one of the more crowded categories, cardiovascular devices. One of the companies mentioned in the market map is Respicardia, which is developing implantable therapies to improve both respiratory and cardiovascular health. This category, along with diabetes, have gained a lot of traction recently with the emergence of new private startups, but also with the activities of large tech companies such as Apple and Google as they navigate these areas. We will discuss this more in detail as we go on in the webinar. Now let's move on to exit activity with looking at some of the acquisitions and IPOs and medical devices. So as you can see from this chart, exits have been falling steadily since 2015. And if we compare exits activity from last year compared to what was seen in 2013, M&A activity in 2017 saw an all-time low. This may be contributed to a number of reasons. The diagnostics company Theranos has had legal battles in the past over its blood tests. There were data vulnerability issues with Abbott's implantable cardiac monitors. Another reason could be due to the unknown future of the medical device tax at the time, which puts a 2.3% tax on the industry. This was just recently delayed until 2020. Overall, medical device corporations have been less active in acquiring startups. In the last 5 years, medical device veterans such as Medtronic, Stryker, and BC Technical have had the most acquisitions in the space. However, it is notable that each of these companies has slowed down in the volume of their acquisitions since about 2015 to 2016. This is in line with the overall decrease in exits in the medical devices space. As you can see, both Medtronic and Stryker's last acquisition in the space was back in 2016, with BC Technical going back to 2015. As new players have emerged in the medical devices space, incumbents have made a play for setting up strategic partnerships. Starting off at the bottom, Stryker's latest partnership is with the company 3D Systems for its virtual surgical planning platform to use in personalized surgery. It combines medical imaging, surgical simulation, and 3D printing. For Stryker, it is another surgery partnership who announced last February of the partnership with Microsoft for its HoloLens technology to build a 3D operating room for surgeries. 2016 saw big partnerships for Boston Scientific, where it partnered with Google for the Connected Patient Challenge, where big data and digital health companies came together. They also partnered with Accenture for treating cardiovascular conditions through a cloud-based digital health solution for hospitals. Medtronic has had an increase in the volume of such partnerships and collaborative initiatives in research, specifically for diabetes management. For example, Medtronic has worked with both IBM Watson and Samsung separately for developing mobile apps catered towards monitoring glucose for diabetes patients. Fitbit provided the activity tracking data for Medtronic's diabetes app as well. And lastly, they worked with Neutrino to create a nutrition insights application for diabetes patients. We've also seen interesting corporate collaborations, especially in the diagnostic space, involving imaging and artificial intelligence. Especially as AI continues to affect virtually all industries, medical device incumbents are looking to integrate AI into their products. For example, General Electric Healthcare, who is known for their imaging devices used globally, announced back in November that it would partner with NVIDIA. This would bring deep learning capabilities to GE's medical devices. Specifically, they will work in bringing an NVIDIA-powered Revolution Frontier CT, which will be faster in its imaging processing capabilities. So we've seen how big tech companies like GE, Google, and Microsoft are now coming into the medical device space. In this next section, we'll analyze some of their most recent activities, which has the potential to disrupt the industry. Apple has made a lot of progress on its cardiovascular health program, which is the main focus for the tech company using its consumer-facing products, the iPhone and the Apple Watch. So far, there are no FDA-cleared products, however, this may change relatively soon. The focus of its cardiovascular program is centered around atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is an irregularity in heart rhythms, which is a common medical condition and affects a lot of people. While the Apple Watch could one day soon be considered a medical device on its own, it may come as a surprise to some that Apple software or applications may end up becoming medical devices as well as software as a medical device. The company may also be involved with helping set up the initial framework around this new category with the international regulatory body that handles medical devices. So some of the next steps for Apple include the possibility for its Apple Heart Study app, which is a collaborative project with Stanford Medicine, to be considered a medical device. It could also develop a sensor in the watch in the future that could be considered an electrocardiogram. Diabetes is also a big focus for Apple. Just this month, Cardiogram, who works with Apple along with the University of California at San Francisco for the Deep Heart Study, revealed the latest results from its clinical study using the Apple Watch. And the results showed that the Apple Watch could detect pre-existing diabetes with up to 85% accuracy using the watch's heart rate sensor. Of course, at this point, they are not claiming that diabetes can be detected using the watch just yet. It is an ongoing research initiative and signals future diabetes health tools from Apple. However, it's also looking at tracking other health metrics using, once again, its Apple Watch. Study results from a study last November showed that it can accurately detect hypertension and sleep apnea with a high degree of accuracy. This comes as no surprise since patents regarding blood pressure devices from Apple have been around since last March. The patent here shown on the left is one of Apple's latest published patents, which is a wrist-wearing blood pressure device. Last March, there was another published patent of a wearable blood pressure monitor using a technique commonly used to measure intraocular pressure in the eyes. So this latest published patent confirms that a blood pressure device is still in the works. There is also the possibility that they could eventually end up integrating this technology into the Apple Watch. Moving on to Google, the latest patent by Google shows its ambitions in the medical devices landscape. This patent, which was published last month on the left, shows how optical sensors use light rays for ultimately disease detection, specifically for cardiovascular diseases. In this patent, we see an optical sensor placed in the patient's bathroom. This would allow the patient to track his or her own health at home. It would monitor certain aspects of one's physical appearance and track changes that hint cardiovascular health concerns. This patent also showed the integration of other Google products, such as the Google Glass, in this disease detection process. It also included novel sensors on the patient's body, like electronic skin adhesives for collecting more diagnostic information. And so over here on the right, I did want to show another patent filing from Google last October, where it showed a device for abdominojugular reflex. And this is where a pressure cuff is wrapped around the patient's abdomen while a video of the neck is captured using a smartphone. And this is a medical exam that diagnoses right ventricle dysfunction of the heart. So Google's focus on diagnostics is seen here again with its application of artificial intelligence as a diagnostics tool for disease detection. Using machine learning, Google has trained its algorithms to detect a condition which can be a difficult one to diagnose, known as diabetic retinopathy. It causes damage to the retina due to diabetes, and patients could lose their eyesight as a result of the disease. As a big player in artificial intelligence, Google hopes to use its neural network algorithms to diagnose this disease on par with experienced ophthalmologists. Google isn't the only tech company that's working on perfecting their AI algorithms for disease diagnostics. Microsoft and IBM, respectively, are working on this as well, harnessing their own technologies. Now we will discuss new startups and devices that are currently visible in the medical device industry. So moving on from traditional wearables where just your steps are counted, different startups are now focusing on very specific diseases for their respective wearables. A recent example of this is Empatica's Embrace Watch, which was just FDA approved as an epilepsy seizure detecting medical device. As a direct-to-consumer product, this device shows a new direction that wearable companies are heading towards. Also, a trend currently seen is that wellness wearables are becoming healthcare wearables as well. And this is happening as consumer brands with good user experience leverage to go into the healthcare market. And a good example of this is a wellness wearable company, Fitbit, and their latest partnership with Sano, a diabetes management tool that has a patented biometric sensor and connected application to monitor glucose levels. This is a heat map graphic which shows the equity funding of every industry impacted by artificial intelligence. And this is updated every month. And this shows equity funding from Q4 of 2012 to Q4 of 2017. And as you can see here, healthcare has been consistently the most popular industry for artificial intelligence investments, especially amongst imaging and diagnostics companies. Artificial intelligence relies on machine learning, which is a set of algorithms used to make a system artificially intelligent, enabling it to recognize patterns from large data sets and apply the findings to new data. As seen in the previous example, artificial intelligence-enabled medical devices will be better positioned as the definition of medical device evolves into more connected platforms and with software becoming a larger part of this space. Artificial intelligence-powered medical devices are gaining traction, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, and it's especially the case with these three categories of monitoring, wearables, and imaging. A monitoring tool I wanted to highlight here is Glooko, a diabetes management mobile-based platform. Just this month, the FDA cleared Glooko's mobile insulin dosing system as a medical device, which is an app-driven tool that pulls data directly from the patient's blood glucose meter and allows clinicians to create a customized treatment plan, and it sends it directly to the patients. Another AI-derived platform that I wanted to highlight here, which was also approved by FDA this month, is Viz.ai in the imaging category. And this is an AI-derived platform that is used as a clinical decision support tool that analyzes CT results with stroke cases being highlighted. The term software as a medical device is a relatively new term in the medical devices landscape, in that the increase in software and connected platforms are becoming more common now using more advanced technologies. Most recently, this past December, FDA released a clinical guidance document outlining FDA's current thinking on this topic, which was assisted by the work of International Medical Devices Regulatory Forum, composed of global experts around the world that are helping create this framework around the use of using software as a medical device. The guidance was released with the preface from the FDA that it represents the current thinking of the Food and Drug Administration on this topic, but that it's not binding on FDA or the public yet. And the illustration that I highlighted here was included as part of that guidance document to show where the line is drawn, where independent review is less or more important in terms of this new category of software as a medical device. And it shows the different categories based on the levels of impact. So moving on to the new types of therapeutics that are on the rise. Proteus Digital Health and Otsuka Pharmaceuticals' digital medicine product, known as Abilify MySight, was FDA cleared this past November. And this combined the schizophrenia drug from Otsuka Pharmaceutical with the adherence tracking sensor from Proteus. And this is a really interesting drug because the patient would ingest it, and then the sensor embedded inside the drug would send a signal when it reaches the stomach. And then the signal is then detected by a wearable patch, sending the exact time and date of when the pill was taken to a mobile application. Another type of therapeutic that is novel is Rani Therapeutics, and they recently raised funding for a robotic pill that can avoid injections and still deliver therapies without being digested in the acidic stomach environment. And how this works is you have the small needles that are injecting the drug into the intestinal wall once it reaches the destination, and the needles dissolve naturally after it injects that drug. And I found the quote by the founder really interesting in that he describes it as a combination of a device and a drug. Next, we'll look at the forward-looking trends in the medical devices landscape, particularly the emerging technology that we may see incorporated into future medical devices. Healthcare industry, like finance, deals with a lot of sensitive information, and this is why cybersecurity is such a big concern as hospitals begin to integrate more medical devices for patient care. It may become vulnerable to hacks and ransomware attacks, especially with outdated medical equipment. And so, until medical device companies can ensure hospitals and health systems of the security measures around their devices, it may be difficult to convince them to adopt both new and old medical devices. And this is something that we've seen happen in the last year or two. We've seen Johnson & Johnson warn their patient population of the insulin pump that was vulnerable to hacking, the FDA warning to Abbott when Abbott experienced a heart device battery issue with their implantable cardiac devices. And so connected devices, they do come with risk and biological cybersecurity issues, and this is going to be a huge field as connected implantable heart monitors, prosthetics, and neuro implants become the norm. One of the medical cybersecurity startups that I wanted to highlight here is Medigate. They are an Israel-based company, and they last received funding this past November with $5.35 million. So it's a relatively new company, and the key features of the technology that they work off of is protecting networked patients' medical devices from cyber attacks through a three-pronged approach using discovery, identification, and visibility process, as well as threat detection and attack prevention. And I've also noted 3 other similar companies that are also working within the medical cybersecurity startups. And it's notable that all of these companies are relatively new with all early stage deals. As more software spurs the need to have more secure protocols, it will be an interesting trend to watch out for as hospitals protect their devices from possible cyber attacks. Another forward-looking trend in the future is how regulators are acting to encourage medical device innovation. Recent moves from the FDA point to an effort to remove more roadblocks and try out new channels for approval, as well as looking at collaboration with the private sector. Here, I wanted to briefly discuss the impact of the Over-the-Counter Hearing Act of 2017, which was enacted into law last August. This allows hearing aid makers to sell directly to consumers if they meet FDA requirements. This eliminates the need for patients to visit their physicians for obtaining these hearing aids. Another recent development that I wanted to highlight is FDA's readiness to work on medical device innovation with possibly increased funding to spend there, along with its outreach to industry players for guidance and collaboration. An example of this collaboration effort by the FDA is the Digital Health Pre-Certification Pilot Program. And essentially, the FDA selected 9 companies from different industries to come together for this collaborative program, which includes tech companies, pharma companies, and science and healthcare-oriented companies. And they were selected last summer, and the focus of this program was to eventually allow each of these companies to build products without waiting for clearance or approval for the submission of each product. Essentially, it results in shorter timelines to get approved products and applications on the market. And this is significant for any kind of digital health or medical device oriented products because they could roll these items out on a much more expedited timeline. And most recently, at the end of last month in January, FDA, along with these companies, held a public workshop specifically regarding the topic software as a medical device. And as I've mentioned earlier, this is a big topic right now as they attempt at setting clear definitions of what exactly it is and what the regulations around it should look like. So moving on to another forward-looking trend, 3D printing has been around for some time now, and a possible trend that we could see in the coming years is using it for growing artificial tissues and organs, which is building onto its current applications that are used in healthcare, such as dental and bone implants. Although 3D bioprinting has been a popular topic in the medical devices space in the last couple of years, there hasn't been many developments here in terms of it actually resulting in an artificial organ ready for transplants. So the closest that we've gotten here is 3D printed tibia, which was transplanted in Australia for a patient who faced losing his leg to amputation. And the last few years, we've seen laboratories working on everything from artificial kidneys, hearts, to skin grafts. We've also seen new forms of bioink that draws from different technologies to make this a reality. So here I wanted to bring attention to a couple of the companies that are doing innovative things. Prellis Biologics, for example, they are hoping to eventually get to a point where they can create or print a patient-specific organ with an estimated 2 to 4 month timeline. And they do see this event, they do predict that in 4 to 6 years that this may become a reality. And another company that I wanted to highlight is BioLife 4D. They are using this hydrogel technology to make patient-specific heart organs. And so this is an interesting company to look at because it is using equity crowdfunding to raise funding and opening up the chance to invest to the public. As they move into a new lab in Chicago in a couple of months, they will continue working towards this goal, and it should be interesting to see what these companies should be able to achieve in terms of creating a new type of medical device. And now we will take some questions regarding medical devices. Okay, we have some questions coming in. Question number 1. How much of an impact do you think that tech giants will have on companies like Medtronic, who has been a key player in the space for decades? It's a really good question. I think that tech giants will continue to leverage the consumer-facing technology and the data that comes from that, as well as continuing to really invest in their artificial intelligence technology to create more consumer-friendly products. And I think companies like Medtronic will continue also making strategic partnerships with these tech giants, and I think together the collaborations there will be an interesting thing to look out for. So the second question, how are manufacturers ensuring connected medical devices are secure and that personal health data isn't getting stolen? So I think with manufacturers, they are going to continue rolling out software updates to make sure that medical devices are as secure and protected as much as possible. And I think we'll see regulatory bodies such as the FDA really enforcing that to the extent that they can. I think the more interesting thing that will be more prevalent in the future is the rise of cybersecurity startups and the technology that they can leverage using artificial intelligence and other ways to create more safe channels so that personal health data isn't getting hacked into or stolen, and that pacemakers and implants aren't getting hacked into. Okay, so the third question, what are the most significant holdups in terms of passing regulation around these new technologies? And so, as I've mentioned earlier in the webinar, I think the FDA is open to collaborating with industry players and people that are knowledgeable about technology, and also with big players such as pharmaceutical companies to really figure out what kind of regulatory framework would benefit both the patients, the industry, the medical professionals, everyone really involved in the usage of medical devices and healthcare. And so as far as significant holdups, I don't see that there is a ton of holdups in terms of regulatory oversight currently. That could change in the future, but as of right now, I think it is encouraging that the FDA is constantly rolling out guidance documents that are showing us what their current stance on different topics are. As I've illustrated earlier with the software as a medical device, I think as technology evolves as well, that we'll continue seeing such guidance, and hopefully those we don't see a lot of those holdups. So thank you everyone for attending this medical devices webinar. You'll receive the slides and recording after. Feel free to email me if I didn't get to your question, and have a great afternoon.